He paused, watching me with that unblinking stare of his. "And you, Archie?" "Me. Did you take anything from this?" I sat, poured myself a glass of water, and thought. Wolfe didn't ask that sort of thing for his health. "Yeah," I said. "That sometimes the person holding the evidence isn't trying to hide anything. They're just waiting for someone smart enough to understand it." Wolfe nodded once. "Caroline Locke disappeared to be seen," he said. "She trusted the right people to do the wrong things." I laughed. "You think that includes us?" "It always does." Dinner passed in silence. Afterward I returned to the office. Just long enough to put one last thing in the file. A note, scribbled in my own handwriting. Case closed. No arrest required. 1 chipped teacup. 2 matching lies. Trust broken. Mended. Then released. Never underestimate the value of a quiet absence. Then I filed it under L, between Lerner, Albert, missing brother, found in Toledo, and Leibowitz, Mrs. swindled by her cat psychic. Wolfe was right. Caroline Locke hadn't wanted resolution. She'd wanted recognition, and she got it. That night, as I turned out the lights in the office, I glanced once more at the chipped teacup Wolfe kept on the credenza. Still there. Still quiet. No lipstick this time. No lies. Just a reminder that sometimes the smartest people vanish, not to escape the world, but to reveal it. The final section of a case is always the most deceptive. That's something Wolfe's taught me, though not in so many words. The client's gone, the files are closed, the bad guys are booked or buried in legal red tape, and the desk in the office is for once clean. But that's when the real ending shows up. Not as a confession or revelation, but as something quieter. Sometimes, the ending is a question that no one wants answered. Or worse, a truth that doesn't require explanation at all. 3 days after I delivered Wolfe's letter to Vivian Locke, a small brown envelope arrived at the brownstone. Addressed to me, no return address. Just my name in block letters that looked as though they'd been typed on an old Remington, and then trimmed with scissors and precision. Wolfe didn't like unannounced mail. I opened it anyway. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Caroline Locke, no disguise, no tricks, standing at a ferry terminal, wearing a wide-brimmed hat, sunglasses, and a coat that didn't match her usual sleek wardrobe. She was smiling slightly, her hand resting on the shoulder of a child I didn't recognize, a boy, maybe 6 years old. She was looking past the camera, into the distance. Behind her was the edge of a lake I didn't know, and a mountain range I couldn't name. On the back of the photo, in her neat, minimalist script, were 3 words. "The work continues." I showed it to Wolfe. He didn't speak for a full minute. He just turned the photo in his fingers, then laid it on the desk beside the chipped teacup and looked out the window. The orchids in the south-facing alcove were in full bloom. I got the feeling he barely noticed. "She knew we'd close the file," I said. "She knew you would," he corrected. "She sent this for both of us." He let out a breath, through his nose, soft as a thread of steam. "She didn't need us to find her. She needed us to confirm she was never lost." I sat down. "You think that's her kid?" "Perhaps. More likely a client's or someone she's protecting. Still in the business." "Undoubtedly." There was no signature, no date. That was Caroline's style. She didn't need to be found to be seen. Her mind worked like Wolfe's, deliberate, precise, layered. Where he surrounded with language, she did it with absence. That same day, the papers ran their follow-up on Russell's case. A quiet headline. No mention of Wolfe or me. PR consultant testifies in fraud case. Investment executive allegedly sought patient record. Daria Webb had given them a clean narrative. Russell, desperate to stay ahead of a market collapse, had leaned on Caroline Locke's client information for a whispered advantage. When she refused, he tried to discredit her. The forged prescription, the planted lipstick, the entire performance. Wolfe had called it theater. Caroline had turned it into a trap. And us? We'd just been the ushers, guiding everyone to their seats for the third act. That night I found Wolfe in the plant rooms. He was inspecting the Vanda orchids, which he rarely did unless he was bored or troubled. I waited until he finished pinching a leaf between two fingers like it owed him an apology. "Everything's wrapped," I said. "Russell's lawyer is trying for a deal. Daria's already testifying in the civil inquiry." Vivian stepped down from the foundation board. "It's all going the way it should." "Yes," Wolfe said. "But something's still bothering you." He turned. "Of course it is. Something always does." I waited. He looked toward the western windows. Caroline's letter, the one she sent in the box, said she was not in hiding, but observing. That suggests more than self-preservation. It suggests ongoing scrutiny. A role assumed, not just adopted. "You think she's doing this for someone else?" "I think," Wolfe said, "that she considers herself unfinished." I nodded slowly. "She left the city to protect herself or someone else, but she didn't retire." She resumed. We stood in silence. Finally I said, "You miss her." He grunted. "Don't be fatuous. You do. You miss her mind. You admire what she built. She anticipated motive. She exploited rhythm. She made absence the dominant element of the plot. That is uncommon." "You mean that's you?" "I mean," Wolfe said, stepping past me toward the stairs, "that she belongs in a different chapter. Not mine. Not yours, but not lost." And that, more than anything, was his final verdict. After he went up to change for dinner, I sat at my desk and looked again at the photo she'd sent. The mountain behind her was steep and misty, with trees that narrowed into blue. The ferry behind her was empty. The boy at her side had a toy in his hand, some kind of plastic soldier. She held no bag, no briefcase. But she looked like someone on her way to something important. I placed the photo into the file labeled Lock, Caroline, Disappearance Foundation Teacup, Lipstick, Mauve, and shut the drawer. The chipped teacup still sat on Wolfe's desk. He hadn't moved it. He wouldn't. To him, it was no longer a piece of crockery. It was a symbol, a message Caroline had left behind like a calling card. Not "I'm gone, but I know you'll see this." And we had, as Fritz announced, dinner: rack of lamb, sautéed fennel, buttered peas. I turned off the office lights. Wolfe was already seated, unfolding his napkin with the same precision he used on case files and rare books. "Fritz," he said, as the first plate was laid down, "this lamb is not New Zealand." Fritz muttered something in French. Wolfe grunted again and took a bite. "Archie," he said, between mouthfuls, "if I ever vanish, do not pursue me." I already heard this line. Yes, but this time I mean it literally. "Where would you go?" He lifted his beer. "Somewhere I'm not needed." Which means very far indeed. I raise my glass in salute. "I'll keep your teacup polished." Wolfe's eyes flicked up. "No, let it gather dust. It's more honest that way." And that, at last, was the real end. Not with a shot fired, not with a scream, but with a single chipped cup, left behind by someone who had already gone on ahead, and who, just like Wolfe, had never needed to stand up to win. It was nearly a week after the case officially concluded, the files labeled and closed, the teacup dusted once but otherwise undisturbed, when the final piece arrived. It didn't come by courier or telegram, but through something far more insidious: gossip. I was having lunch at Rusterman's with Saul Panza. He was halfway through a steak sandwich, and I was nursing a club soda, when a waiter, all slicked hair and sidelong glances, leaned in and said, "You two hear about the Lock woman?" Saul and I shared a look. I raised an eyebrow. "What about her?" "She's back. Caroline," I said. "No, the sister, Vivian, took a slot on the board of a new consulting group. Some boutique security firm that's advising mental health nonprofits. Quiet, but heavy on the donors. Name of the group: Peregrine Strategy. Sounds British, but the money's American." Saul made a low sound in his throat. I asked for the check. By the time I got back to the brownstone, I'd already made 3 calls. The firm was real, if small. No website, No contact email, but a client list that included 2 state university research hospitals and a lobbying group with ties to federal mental health policy, and at the top of the advisory board, Vivian Locke, strategic ethics consultant. Wolfe listened as I relayed all this. He didn't interrupt. When I was done, he reached for a cherry from the glass bowl beside him and said, "She took the lesson," which was, control the narrative, but more importantly, shape it before it's needed. You think Caroline put her up to it? I think, Wolfe said. Caroline left a vacuum. And Vivian, having peered into it, decided to fill it with caution this time. She's not leveraging it for herself. Perhaps. But if she is, she knows the cost of deceit now. One does not forget being baited with China. I smiled. So justice wasn't just served, it was taught. Yes. And that, Wolfe said, is rarer than satisfaction. There was a final note to the affair. That evening, I found a small package in my top desk drawer. No one saw who delivered it. Inside was a single folded slip of paper. No signature. You understood it. That was all I hoped. C.L. Taped to the inside of the envelope flap was the missing turmeric jar. It was clean, empty, carefully wiped. The label had been peeled halfway off, like someone had meant to hide it and then changed their mind. Wolfe placed it next to the chipped teacup on the credenza. He said nothing. He didn't need to. The story had begun with a planted teacup and a sister's carefully composed concern. It ended with a return, not of a person, but of intent. Caroline Locke had never disappeared. She had simply stepped behind the curtain, long enough to let the spotlight fall where it needed to. And when it did, we all saw what she wanted us to. Wolfe reclined, hands laced over his belly, the evening paper unopened beside him. Archie. Yes, sir. Dinner. As I stood, he added, there is no greater crime than the manipulation of trust. I paused, and no finer justice than its restoration. He closed his eyes. Exactly. And with that, the brownstone returned to silence, its sacred rhythm undisturbed. Just one teacup, one truth, and 2 men who, for once, didn't have to chase the ending. We'd already arrived. A single teacup, 1 lipstick smudge, and a killer who vanished. Welcome to Faded Echoes. I am your host, Ombre. Tap the comments and tell me where you're listening from today. Your messages make this mystery circle feel like home. If I'd known that the day would begin with a lavender scarf, a chipped porcelain teacup, and a client who made Nero Wolfe shift 1 full inch in his chair, I might have had my eggs with more attention and less Tabasco. The scarf arrived first on the neck of a woman with a walk like she was balancing a secret and heels sharp enough to argue with the sidewalk. She rang the bell at precisely 10:01 a.m., which meant Fritz had barely finished slicing Wolfe's breakfast pear into 8ths when I heard the buzz. Goodwin, Wolfe said from the dining room, not even looking up from his eggs with shad roe. You may answer that infernal thing. I did, with my usual grace. On the stoop was a woman in her mid-30s, dressed like money, but not new money. Dignified, restrained, the kind of elegance that came with lawyers on retainer and a mother who still sent handwritten notes on stationery. The lavender scarf was a splash of drama against her charcoal coat, and the lipstick, subtle but strategic, told me she knew how to negotiate both men and mirrors. I'd like to speak to Mr. Nero Wolfe, she said, her voice smooth as a peeled grape, but with an edge that could dice onions. Privately. Well, that depends. Mr. Wolfe is not fond of uninvited drama or public transport. If you came by cab, that gives you 1 point. If you brought your own car and it's foreign-made, that's 2. Her lips twitched. I parked a Jaguar 2 blocks over. I didn't want your employer thinking I was trying too hard. Score 1 for Miss Lavender Scarf. I brought her in and got her name, Vivian Locke. She declined coffee, sat exactly at the edge of the red chair in Wolfe's office, and waited for the great man himself to enter. When Wolfe did, it was with the slow majesty of a monarch who knew his throne had been kept warm. He glanced once at Vivian, once at me, and then let himself down into the chair behind his desk, with a sigh that would have done justice to a storm-weary captain. "You are not here to hire me for a divorce case," Wolfe said without preamble. Vivian tilted her head. "No. Nor for a missing pet, a financial dispute, or a trivial vendetta. No." "Then speak." She reached into her handbag, not hurried, not dramatic, and pulled out a delicate bone china teacup. She set it on Wolfe's desk like it was evidence in a courtroom, which in many ways it was. It had one visible flaw, a small smudge of mauve lipstick right on the rim, the kind of mark someone might leave in a rush, or in panic. Wolfe didn't touch it, of course. He just looked. "That," Vivian said, "is the last teacup my sister ever used. 3 days ago, she left my apartment, got into her car, and never arrived at work. She's not answering her phone, and she's not the type to disappear. And the police, they're treating it like a voluntary absence. Over 30, no foul play. They've advised me to wait." Wolfe closed his eyes. For a moment I thought he was going to pass. Instead he murmured, "You brought me a teacup." "I brought you a question," she said. "Why is there lipstick on that cup? My sister never wore it. Not ever." That got him. Wolfe opened his eyes. "You intrigue me, Miss Locke," he said. "Archie, get details." I did. Sister's name Caroline Locke. Age 36. Clinical psychologist. Quiet, cautious. Never married. No known enemies except a brief squabble over a research grant 6 months prior. Lived alone. Car found parked near her office. Untouched. But the keys were gone. Wolfe asked 3 more questions. All simple, all loaded. Vivian answered each without flinching. When she stood to go, she left the cup on the desk. "You'll take the case?" she asked. "I already have," Wolfe said. When she was gone, he finally looked at me. "Archie." "Yes, sir." "Throw that scarf into the hall closet. It reeks of lavender. I detest lavender." And just like that, we were in. When Vivian Locke left the brownstone, she did it the same way she'd come in, composed, efficient, and without asking if she'd impressed us. That in itself was impressive. I stood in the front hall for a moment longer than necessary, watching the foggy square of glass on the front door fade back to neutrality. I returned to the office to find Wolfe gazing at the teacup like it was some stubborn orchid that had bloomed out of season. "She's not lying," I said, taking my chair. "Or at least, not about the sister. She had the right level of worry, cool but not staged. Either she's a good actress, or she's genuinely concerned." "Foy," Wolfe muttered. "She may be concerned and still lying. The two are not mutually exclusive." He leaned back slightly, not enough to break the line of his posture, but enough to show he was now settled into what he liked best, mental positioning. The kind that let him move knights and bishops across a psychological chessboard, while still digesting Fritz's breakfast. "Lipstick on a teacup," he said, "is not a clue. It is an intrusion. It should not be there. Its presence is not additive, it subtracts from consistency. Therefore, we must ask who drank from that cup and wished it to appear that her sister had. Assuming the cup was left in the sister's apartment and not swapped in later. Assume nothing. Confirm everything. Begin with Miss Locke's apartment. Speak to the doorman if there is one. Establish time, movement, visitors. Examine the scene. Yes. Yes, as best you can, Archie. I'll tolerate minimal contamination if it yields context." He made a motion like he was brushing dust from the air. That meant I was dismissed. I called a cab and made it to the Upper East Side by a little past noon. Vivian lived in a place that said, "My family used to summer in Maine, and we still have the boat to prove it." 5th floor corner unit. Uniformed doorman who gave me a side-eye until I said Wolfe's name. Then he gave me a full blink and said, "Ah, the detective." That told me Vivian had briefed him. Good. The man's name was Lyle, and he remembered Caroline Locke from 3 days earlier. She came down at 7:50. That morning, Tuesday, she had coffee in a travel mug. Always did. And she waved. She always waved. She didn't wave that morning. Suspicious. Not really, Lyle said. She looked distracted. People look distracted all the time in this city. She didn't come back, and Miss Vivian came down 2 hours later, looking pale and tight-lipped. What time did Vivian get back? He thought. She left at 8:15, came back around 6, said she'd gone to check on Caroline after she didn't answer texts or calls. How often do they see each other? Weekly. Usually Sunday brunch, close sisters, but different styles. Caroline was formal. Vivian's warmer. I logged that. Lyle buzzed me in, and I took the elevator up to the 5th floor. Vivian had left a key under a porcelain elephant by the door, just as she'd promised. She was thorough. That made me cautious. The apartment had the kind of curated neatness you associate with therapists and people who color-code bookshelves. Not messy but lived in, too organized to be staged, too human to be sterile. I let the door swing closed behind me and started with the kitchen. There was the counter. There was the cup, or rather, a matching one, sitting next to a drying rack, the same floral china as the one Vivian had handed Wolfe, minus the lipstick. That, right there, was a red flag with tassels on it. Because nobody dries one cup and leaves its twin in her handbag unless she's making a point. I checked the trash. Nothing. No tissues with lipstick, no napkins, no makeup wipes. The dishwasher hadn't been run since Monday. The sink was dry. In the living room I found Caroline's planner neatly filled in, no scratch-outs, appointments through Thursday. No notes past Tuesday morning. No mention of meeting anyone unusual. Just patient. RL phone call, MT, and lunch AR. AR didn't mean anything to me. I jotted it down. Bedroom, next. Dresser, tidy. Bed made. Closet, too neat. Nothing out of place. If Caroline had packed for a trip or a quick disappearance, she'd done it in invisible ink. The bathroom had exactly 2 things of note. A bottle of mouthwash, half full, and a lipstick tray. 9 tubes in varying shades of beige, blush, and coral. I checked each. None matched the mauve on the cup Vivian had brought. So if Caroline didn't wear that lipstick, and Vivian was telling the truth, someone had been in this apartment. Someone had used that cup, and someone had tried to suggest Caroline had done it herself. I returned to the living room and stood there trying to absorb the atmosphere. Something was missing. Not in the sense of burglary, but of disruption, the kind of thing Wolfe would notice in the air. And I had to chase with effort. On a hunch I went back to the kitchen and opened the spice drawer. Now, you'd think that was a fool's errand. But Wolfe has this theory that spices tell you more about a person than their bookshelf, and Caroline's were alphabetized. Except for one. Nutmeg was in the place where turmeric should have been, and turmeric yellow, aggressive, unforgiving turmeric was gone. I checked the pantry. Nothing. No turmeric anywhere. That was a weird one. I left everything as I'd found it, and locked up, downstairs. I thanked Lyle, and asked one more thing. Did anyone come by on Monday, or Tuesday morning, other than Caroline and Vivian? He nodded. Tuesday early, around 7. A man, sharp suit, looked like money, said he was there for Caroline. I told him I hadn't seen her yet. He waited 10 minutes, then left. Describe him. Tall, mid-40s, clean-shaven, pale, had a mole right here. He tapped the side of his jaw, didn't give a name, but he had that I don't need to explain myself look. I got back to the brownstone at 2:30 and found Wolfe with a glass of beer and a volume of Pliny the Elder. He didn't look up when I came in. She was tidy, I said. Too tidy. Her planner stops abruptly. Her trash doesn't lie, and her lipstick tray is an alibi. She didn't leave on purpose. He closed the book. The lipstick still doesn't belong. Nothing in her place matches it. But the kitchen had a second cup in the rack. Same pattern. The one Vivian brought was planted. Expected, he said. What else? Her nutmeg's where her turmeric should be, and the turmeric's missing. Either she took up experimental cuisine or someone removed it deliberately. That got his eyebrows up. A rare occasion. Turmeric stains, he said. Indelibly. Exactly. He tapped the edge of his chair. We must now ascertain who would benefit from Caroline Locke's absence. Begin with Vivian. She is the vector of the narrative. But I want background on Caroline's clients, friends, and this lunch appointment. She's a psychologist, I said. That could be anyone from a distressed ex-boyfriend to a narcissist on a self-care bender. Use discretion. Begin with the sister. I nodded. And the man at the apartment, 7 a.m. suit, mole on his jaw, no name. Find him, Wolfe said. If he drank from that cup, he meant us to notice. And I intend to. He picked up the teacup again, holding it like a relic. Then he murmured, more to the room than to me. A teacup may not kill a person, but it can certainly indict one. I went for the phone to start dialing. The lipstick was leading us, all right. And I had a feeling it wasn't finished yet. It's a professional hazard in my line of work to doubt every good story, especially when it comes perfectly wrapped in lavender scarves and faint perfume. By the time I finished dialing Vivian Locke's number, I'd already decided to treat her like a suspect with style, not an innocent with a sister problem. She picked up on the second ring. Miss Locke, I said, I've just come from Caroline's apartment. I'd like to ask you a few questions, preferably in a setting that doesn't smell like clinical efficiency. You mean my place? If that's where you keep the honesty. Yes. She hesitated, then said, I'm home. You can come now. I was at her door, 20 minutes later. Her place was what I expected. Clean lines, white on gray, and furniture that told you how much it cost without saying a word. She greeted me in slacks and a cardigan, hair pulled back, face bare. It was a calculated look, conspicuously uncalculated. You said you had questions, she said, leading me into a sunlit sitting room that looked barely used. I don't know how much more help I can be. I sat, crossed my ankle over my knee, and pulled out my notebook. Let's revisit the teacup. You brought it to Wolfe, said Caroline didn't wear lipstick. But you left an identical cup in the drying rack at her apartment. Why? Her eyes didn't flinch, but her mouth did a tiny half-smile. I thought you'd find that. I thought you wanted me to. I wanted you to notice that the cup I brought wasn't just unusual. It was contradictory. Caroline was neat. She wouldn't leave a stained cup on her desk, especially with lipstick she didn't own. Which brings me to the bigger point. Why didn't you take that cup straight to the police? Because the police don't understand symbolic disruptions. I raised an eyebrow. Try me. She stood, walked to a sideboard, and poured herself a glass of water. She didn't offer me any. Caroline and I were close, but she didn't trust easily. When she did, it was absolute. If someone else drank from her teacup, someone who wore lipstick, it wasn't an accident. It was a message. To you, to anyone who knew her habits, which means the message was private. Someone wanted you to find that cup. She nodded. And I did. But I didn't know who else had seen it. It felt placed. Like a riddle. And you thought Wolfe would appreciate the puzzle. I thought he was the only one who could solve it. That was either flattery or strategy. I was betting on the second. I changed tack. Tell me about AR lunch appointment in Caroline's planner. Alvin Russell, she said, without hesitation. He's a hedge fund manager. Older, elegant, a bit too interested in his own vocabulary. He and Caroline went on a few dates earlier this year. Then she stopped. Why? She said he asked questions he had no business asking. Such as, about her patients. One in particular. She didn't name him, but she said Alvin got pushy. Caroline backed off. Could he have a reason to make her disappear? I don't know. But he had motive to pry. I wrote down his name and number. Did Caroline ever mention feeling watched, followed, threatened? Vivian hesitated, then nodded. 2 weeks ago, she told me she found her front door unlocked when she came home one night. Nothing stolen. But the windows were all closed, and she always left one in the kitchen cracked for air. Did she report it? No. She didn't want to seem paranoid. She was giving me good material. That made me nervous. What about turmeric? That made her blink. Excuse me, was it one of Caroline's favorites? It's missing. She looked genuinely puzzled. She used it in tea blends, but she wouldn't hide it. Why would anyone care about turmeric? That's what I'm trying to find out. When I left her apartment, I had Alvin Russell's name, a sister with sharp memory, and a teacup that looked more and more like a loaded gun. I called Saul Panzer. You busy? I'm always busy, he said. But I'm also polite. I need you to check out a guy. Alvin Russell, hedge fund, early 50s, thinks he's better dressed than he is. Cross-reference him with Caroline Locke. On it. I hung up and headed downtown. Wolfe was waiting with beer in hand, foot elevated, attitude stable. She's good, I said. Too good. Either she's clever or she's clean, but not both. Wolfe grunted. She gave me a name. Alvin Russell. Dated Caroline. Pressed her for patient info. A fool, Wolfe muttered. She wouldn't yield. So he pressed harder. Possibly. Caroline ended it, and 2 weeks later someone's in her apartment drinking tea like a ghost. He tapped a finger on the teacup. And the turmeric. She used it in tea. The fact that it's missing means someone knew that and didn't want to leave a trail. Or, Wolfe said, someone did want to leave a trail. Falsely. Just then, the phone rang. I picked up. Saul. Russell's got a record, he said. Not criminal. Financial. SEC looked into him 5 years ago for insider stuff. Slippery, but clean on paper. Also, he had a minor altercation at a fundraiser 3 months ago with a psychologist named guess who? Caroline Locke. Bingo. Witness said it looked like a disagreement, not a breakup. Thanks, Saul. I relayed the info to Wolfe. He nodded slowly. Summon Mr. Russell. Here. I wish to see how he wears his confidence under scrutiny. It took some coaxing, but Russell agreed to come. The lure of Nero Wolfe's name still carried weight with men who thought they couldn't be read. When he arrived at 6 sharp, he looked just as Vivian described, polished, tall, the scent of arrogance tucked into every crease of his jacket. He offered a hand Wolfe didn't take. Mr. Russell, Wolfe said, you were involved with Dr. Caroline Locke. Yes, a brief relationship. Brief, because she ended it. Russell sat. We had disagreements about patient privacy. Russell narrowed his eyes. I asked questions. She refused to answer. That was her right. Yet you pressed. I'm a curious man, Mr. Wolfe. Wolfe nodded. So am I. Curious enough to ask if you were at her apartment the morning she disappeared. Russell didn't blink. No, the doorman says otherwise. Silence. Then, a shrug. I stopped by. She hadn't returned my calls. I was concerned. You waited 10 minutes, then left. What did you see? Nothing unusual. No one else entered. The lobby was quiet. Did you enter the apartment? No. Wolfe's tone dropped half a pitch. Did you drink tea? I beg your pardon. You left a lipstick mark on a bone china teacup. Mauve. Not your shade. That rattled him. I think this meeting is over, he said, standing. Wolfe didn't move. You may leave, but I will find out what Caroline Locke refused to tell you, and whether your interest was emotional or financial. Russell didn't answer. He left without another word. I turned to Wolfe. He's lying. Of course. You want me to tail him? No, Wolfe said. I want you to find the patient Caroline was protecting. The one Russell wanted information about. That is the route. Everything else is leave. He closed his eyes. The teacup, the turmeric, the sister with a clean conscience, all of it pointed to one person we hadn't seen. The patient. And whoever they were, they'd just become the centerpiece of Wolfe's next move. The next morning began with Fritz's eggs, Wolfe's grumbling about drafts in the newspaper's logic columns, and my mind on the lipstick mark that still felt like a signature waiting to be deciphered. Wolfe was in no hurry. That meant I had to be. By 9:15, I was in Midtown, walking up the stone steps to the office, where Caroline Locke practiced psychology. The brass plaque outside read, Dr. Caroline Locke, Ph.D. Cognitive Therapy and Behavioral Insight. By appointment only. The suite was on the 6th floor of a tidy pre-war building, the kind that whispered wealth but not prestige. I gave my name to the receptionist, a fidgety woman named Lorna, who looked like she'd been living off black coffee and worry for the past 72 hours. When I said investigation and Nero Wolfe in the same breath, her spine straightened just enough to signal fear or hope. Maybe both. Dr. Locke hasn't been in since Tuesday, she said. I wasn't sure what to do. She's never missed a full day, let alone 3. You notify anyone? Police? Her sister, Miss Locke, came by yesterday. She was calm, but sharp. That tracked. Vivian could hold a conversation like a scalpel. Mind if I look at the appointment book? I asked. She hesitated. Technically, I shouldn't. Technically, your employer's gone missing. We're not the police, but we're trying to make sure they don't waste time chasing their tails. Dr. Locke would want her schedule checked, don't you think? It worked. She led me to the inner office, spare but elegant. Pale walls, darker furniture, soft lights, and a deep red armchair that had seen 100 confessions and not one spilled drink. On the desk sat a paper planner, neatly organized in Dr. Locke's square handwriting. Tuesday morning had been blocked out for 3 patients. RL. Just a dash. Nothing else. What's this blank one? I asked. Lorna leaned over. That was unusual. She added that slot. Monday afternoon. Said it was an emergency, but she didn't tell me a name. She ever do that? Never. That dash wasn't empty. It was loaded. I flipped back through earlier pages, looking for repeat entries. RL showed up 6 times in the last 3 weeks. I pointed. Who's R? Raymond Lott. Comes in every Thursday. Intense, polite, bit jumpy. Worked in finance, I think. And a AR. Alvin Russell. The hedge fund guy. Showed up once a week until last month. Why'd he stop? They had a falling out. I don't know what about, but the next time he showed up, Dr. Locke wouldn't see him. Interesting. Caroline hadn't just ghosted Russell, she'd blacklisted him, which meant his sudden reappearance Tuesday morning wasn't concern. It was intrusion. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened while I laid it all out. She added an appointment Monday afternoon, I said, but didn't write a name. Emergency session. That means something changed. Fast. Indeed, Wolfe muttered. The lipstick, the missing turmeric, the blank entry. He was leaning back in his chair, fingertips touching, eyes half-lidded. I added, Lott and Russell are both worth poking at. Russell's already stammering. Lott may be more subtle. Wolfe opened his eyes. Locate Mr. Lott. Question him. And Archie, don't just listen. Observe. He didn't need to say it twice. I pulled strings, burned a lunch hour, and found Raymond Lott in a co-op on 86th Street, across from a shuttered bookstore, and a florist, whose tulips were sagging in the window. I rang the buzzer, and a voice clipped, male, slightly brittle, answered, Yes, Mr. Lott. My name's Archie Goodwin. I'm investigating the disappearance of Dr. Caroline Locke. No, I'm with Nero Wolfe. I'll come down. When he opened the door, I pegged him in his early 40s, trim and pale, wearing a blue sweater that looked like it had been ironed by a Swiss Army regiment. He had nervous eyes and the kind of jaw that clenched even when he wasn't speaking. You are one of Dr. Locke's patients, I said. Correct. She's been missing since Tuesday morning. I read something online. Yes. I assumed she was traveling. She said nothing to me about a break. Did she seem worried? Off her game? He shook his head. If anything, she was more focused than usual. Last Thursday's session was in. Why? He looked away. We discussed my past. I waited. He didn't elaborate. Did she mention someone from outside? Someone asking questions? Not specifically. But she said something odd. Which was, she said, if something happens to me, don't trust what you hear first. I thought it was metaphorical, a way to push me into clarity. She say that to you often? No, just that once. That hung in the air, like a fingerprint on glass. Did she ever mention a man named Alvin Russell? He nodded, reluctantly. She said he violated her trust, that he was fixated on one of her patients, pressing for details. Did she say which patient? No. You think it might have been you. He met my eyes. I don't know. But if it was, he shouldn't have been asking. I believed him, partly. There was something in his gaze, though, that said he was protecting more than himself. I gave him my card. If you remember anything, dreams, conversations, symbols, calls. He nodded, then stepped back inside and shut the door with a kind of finality only the truly private can manage. I got back to the brownstone just before 6. Wolfe was at his desk, sipping his beer like it held wisdom. I relayed everything. She told him not to trust what he heard first, I said. Sounds like a warning, or a test. Indeed. Wolfe's voice dropped to that deep, calm register he saved for moments of philosophical weight. She suspected she was under scrutiny, perhaps surveillance. She removed turmeric, not to hide it, but to deny a forensic link. I blinked. You mean she anticipated someone searching the apartment, or contaminating it? She prepared a false scene. She left a decoy. She left a statement. 1 cup, with lipstick not her own. Left for her sister. The other washed. It's a message and a test of perception. Caroline Locke was not panicked. She was planning. I stared at him. So you think she's alive? I think she intended to be. A silence settled over us. Heavy but electric. Then the phone rang. I answered. It was Saul. I found something, he said. Not on Russell. On Caroline's license. She renewed it 6 months ago and gave an emergency contact. Vivian? No, someone else. A woman named Marla Teague. Same last name as Caroline's mother. You talked to her. She's in Jersey. Says Caroline asked her to store a package last week. In case of trouble. Did she? Yeah. And Archie, she said the box has 2 teacups in it. Both clean. 1 chipped. That gave me chills. I hung up and turned to Wolfe. She stored 2 teacups off-site. I said. She knew someone would tamper with the one at her place. Wolfe leaned forward slightly. Caroline Locke constructed a misdirection. Now we must find what she was trying to protect. We were no longer chasing a disappearance. We were following a plan. And the next move, if Wolfe was right, belonged to the woman who'd vanished herself. By the time the sun came up the next day, Wolfe had already made one thing clear. We weren't dealing with a disappearance anymore. We were navigating a strategy. Caroline Locke hadn't vanished in panic. She'd orchestrated her own absence, like a magician slipping behind a curtain, and now it was our job to figure out who she was trying to fool and why. Wolfe didn't leave his chair, naturally, but he did summon me at the ungodly hour of 7:55 a.m., with a single word through the door, Archie. When I walked in, he was already dressed, meaning he had on his house slippers and the yellow silk robe that meant he was expecting answers, not visitors. He nodded once. Marla Teague, Jersey, I said. Loyal family friend. Caroline trusted her enough to leave a package labeled in case of trouble. She's been holding on to it since last Thursday. Caroline called her the morning she disappeared and told her not to open it unless someone from Wolfe's office came asking. He made a small, satisfied grunt. You're going to see her, he said. No objection. I'll take the Hudson Tunnel and a good sense of tact. Wolfe waved a dismissive hand. Or, just take notes. By 10, I was knocking on the door of a weathered Tudor-style home with shutters that had seen more seasons than repairs. Marla Teague opened the door with the cautious warmth of someone who'd once loved a person completely and now feared for them every hour of the day. She was in her late 60s, hair pinned up with the kind of care you don't apply unless your nerves are wired tight. When I told her who I was, She stepped aside immediately and motioned me in. She said you'd come, Marla said, though she didn't say when. I didn't expect it to be this soon. Caroline trusts you, I said. She should. I changed her diapers and I taught her to bake. I'm not family, but close enough that her mother still asks me if Caroline's seeing anyone. We sat in a warm little sitting room that smelled like cinnamon and old books. She brought out the package from behind a cupboard, a small cardboard box, sealed with brown tape. Her name and address were written in Caroline's steady hand, along with 3 words, "Do not open early." Have you touched it? I asked. No, not even shaken it, but she sounded resolute when she called. Not scared, not frantic, just very sure of what she needed me to do. I opened the box carefully, keeping the flaps intact. Inside were 2 bone china teacups, one pristine and the other chipped near the rim. Also inside a folded manila envelope sealed with a single paperclip. It was labeled "Property of N.W." I opened it. Inside were 4 things: a flash drive, a typed, unsigned letter, a photocopy of a prescription pad with a scribbled name I didn't recognize, and a small, square photograph of a man I did. It was Alvin Russell. The letter, typed in clean black ink, was short and exact. Mr. Wolfe, if you are reading this, then something has gone wrong, or I have made it seem as if it has. You will need the following. The chipped cup was used by the man in the photograph. I believe he returned to my apartment without my consent. The flash drive contains audio from my sessions with Client R. His connection to the man pictured is circumstantial but dangerous. The prescription note is a forgery. I suspect it will be relevant. I trust your discretion. I do not trust the narrative as it will be presented to the police. I am not in hiding. I am observing. Yours, C.F. I stared at the letter for a full minute before folding it and tucking everything back inside. Caroline wasn't gone. She was staging. And from what I could tell, she'd caught Russell in a violation serious enough to record and document. She'd faked a vanishing act to expose a truth she couldn't say aloud. I thanked Marla and left with the box. Back at the brownstone, I handed it over to Wolfe like a courier delivering a verdict. He opened it methodically. When he saw the chipped teacup and the letter, he made a low sound satisfaction, dipped in mild contempt. She knew Russell would return, he said. She left the chipped cup out to bait him. The mauve lipstick confirms it. He brought someone, an accomplice, possibly, or an enabler, someone to share the scene with, to claim Caroline had simply left on her own. And the audio files. Wolfe gestured. Fritz has stepped out. Use the machine. I loaded the flash drive into Wolfe's secure laptop and played the first file through the office speakers. Caroline's voice was calm, low, but clearly professional. Session 18. Client, you said the man approached you outside the restaurant. What did he say? Male voice, unsteady. He said he knew my records could be subpoenaed, that if I talked to anyone about the merger, I'd lose more than my job. Caroline, did you recognize him? Male voice, only later, when I saw his name on the news. I didn't know it was Russell until last week. I paused it there. Client R is Lot, I said. He was involved in something Russell didn't want traced, probably insider trading. Caroline had evidence, maybe even a confession, and Russell wanted to know what she knew. Wolfe nodded once. And the prescription pad. I handed it over. He examined it. This signature is not Caroline Locke's, he said. This is a doctor's name I do not recognize. But the date Tuesday, the day of her disappearance, a forged prescription, a falsified scene, and a manipulated narrative. I said, she faked her own exit to draw Russell into a mistake. No, Wolfe said. She faked it to document him making one. That was when the doorbell rang. I answered. It was Saul. Got something, he said. Russell had lunch Tuesday with a woman named Daria Webb, PR background. They left together, stopped at a pharmacy in Gramercy. She used a prescription for diazepam, same one Caroline supposedly wrote. He handed me a copy. Same script. Same forgery. I looked at Wolfe. They planted the script to make Caroline look unstable. Yes, Wolfe said. And now she has them. We were looking at a frame job, neatly constructed, but with one fatal flaw. It underestimated Caroline Locke's intellect and Wolfe's appetite for order. She'll reappear, Wolfe said, but only when she's sure Russell has tripped himself. So what do we do? He closed the box gently. We stage our own bait. We let Russell believe the game is over, that Caroline's files are missing, that he is safe, and then, Wolfe's voice was soft but sharp, then we let the teacup do its work. I cracked my knuckles. Time to rattle the cage. We let a full day pass without making a move. Wolfe called it incubation. I called it maddening. But I kept my complaints to myself, mostly because I knew Wolfe was right. People like Alvin Russell didn't panic when pressed. They panicked when the silence got too loud. On Thursday morning, Wolfe dictated a letter to Mr. Alvin Russell. I am in receipt of certain documents and recordings related to your recent inquiries regarding Dr. Caroline Locke. Some are enlightening. Others are legally problematic. Before I determine whether they merit further attention or action, I would prefer you clarify a few details in person. I will expect you in my office at 6:00 p.m. today. If you decline, I will assume your answer is indirect, but informative. Sincerely, Nero Wolfe. I sent it by messenger. Hand-delivered, no email, no trail. The trap was set. Wolfe didn't speak much. The rest of the day, he sat in the office with the envelope from Caroline on his desk, unopened again like a relic. He refused to replay the audio. It is no longer evidence, he said. It is Saul, in the meantime, was assigned surveillance, keeping an eye on Russell and his PR consort, Daria Webb. I called him around anything. Russell hasn't left the building all day, but she has. Webb went uptown, stopped at a boutique, then back to Russell's place. I think she's dressing for something. Good, I said. They're walking in. At 6:00 sharp, the doorbell rang. Russell came in first, still the picture of untouchable wealth, but the lines around his mouth were deeper, and his confidence had started to molt. Daria Webb followed, tall, red-haired, overdressed for a consultation, but perfect for a performance. She walked like a woman who'd already memorized her lines. I brought them into the office. Wolfe didn't rise, didn't blink. He gestured lazily at the red chairs. They sat. You received my letter, he said. Russell gave a slow nod. I assume this is about Caroline Locke. It is. Her absence, specifically, and the role you've played in ensuring it remains ambiguous. I've played no such role. Foy, Wolfe said, the word as sharp as a tack. You trespassed in her apartment, you tampered with her belongings, and you attempted unsuccessfully to fabricate a psychiatric breakdown. That's absurd. Is it? I have a prescription in front of me, forged with Caroline Locke's name, filled by your associate here. He inclined his head toward Daria. Within hours of Locke's last confirmed sighting. Daria tensed. Her smile was dry, practiced. I'm afraid you're mistaken. That prescription was given to me by a friend of a friend. I didn't know it was forged. Your signature is on the release form, Wolfe said. That stopped her. I stepped in. You used it to pick up diazepam on Tuesday afternoon. The date and time matched the pharmacy's camera footage, and guess who showed up there 20 minutes before you? Alvin. Russell tried to look bored. It came out as anxious. You have no idea what Caroline was mixed up in, he said. She was unstable. Enough, Wolfe snapped. You've made that point twice now. It failed the first time. Caroline Locke is not unstable. She is calculating. She is also, unless you've harmed her alive. The room thickened. Russell's breath caught for a second too long. Daria turned to look at him. You said she started. Then stop. Russell stood up. I won't be threatened. You haven't been, Wolfe said. Yet. He nodded to me. I reached into the desk drawer and pulled out the chipped teacup. I set it down gently on the edge of Wolfe's desk, turning it so the lipstick smudge faced them. Russell stared at it. Then he blinked twice. Daria gasped. That, Wolfe said, is the cup you used on Tuesday morning in Caroline Locke's apartment. You were sloppy. The chip was distinctive. Caroline had two. She saved this one. The clean one, not the one left behind. She anticipated you would tamper with her kitchen, so she prepared the scene to expose your narrative as fiction. Russell took a step back. Wolfe raised his voice slightly. Not loud, but with that impossible clarity that makes every word echo like truth. You orchestrated a psychological disappearance. You wanted her declared unstable. You used her patient lot as leverage, hoping she'd cave. She didn't. So you tried to erase her, not physically, but reputationally. But you made one mistake. Russell's jaw was tight. Which was, you assumed no one was watching you. There was a knock on the front door. Perfect timing. I opened it. Vivian Locke entered, composed as ever, holding a small black notebook. She nodded at Wolfe, then at me. She called me this morning, she said, from an untraceable number, told me to bring this, told me she was ready. She handed Wolfe the notebook. He opened it. Inside were photographs, printouts of Russell and Daria in Caroline's apartment. Caroline had planted a discreet camera behind a kitchen vent. It had captured them rifling through drawers, replacing the forged note, drinking from her china. Wolfe slid the photographs across the desk. Russell didn't sit down. He didn't speak. Daria was already reaching for her purse. I got between her and the door. You'll both stay, Wolfe said, until the police arrive. Russell turned toward me, mouth half open. You don't understand. I wasn't. Wolfe lifted a hand. You tried to destroy a woman's professional life to protect your own criminality. You coerced her patient. You forged documents, and you staged a scene that suggested she'd suffered a breakdown. I understand perfectly. He picked up the chipped cup, turned it gently, and set it back down. You mistook silence for absence. That's always fatal. I made the call. The uniforms came 20 minutes later. By the time they left, Russell and Daria were no longer talking. I returned to the office. Wolfe was already halfway through a bottle of beer. He didn't look up. Well, I said, Caroline staged a disappearance and caught a white-collar predator in the net. Not bad for a therapist. She is no fool, Wolfe said. Where is she now? Safe, I assume. Waiting for the dust to settle. I sat. You know, we still don't know what she was treating Lot for. We don't need to. It's private. And the turmeric. Wolfe allowed a small smile. A spice that stains, he said. Its absence was more conspicuous than its presence. A perfect metaphor for Caroline herself. Fritz entered with dinner. Wolfe took his plate, exhaled, and said, Archie, if I ever disappear, do not search. Assume I am somewhere detestable, doing something necessary. That's quite a thing to say. He shrugged. Better than being found holding a cup I didn't drink from. I grinned. As long as there's no lipstick on it, I'll believe you. And with that, dinner was served. The teacup sat quietly on the credenza, its message fully delivered. The following day brought a kind of quiet Wolfe, relished, and I distrusted. The storm had passed. Technically, Russell and Daria were in custody. Caroline Locke had been declared safe by her sister, and more importantly, herself. And the brownstone had returned to its natural state of slow movements and fast thinking. But I could feel it. Something unfinished hovered in the air, like the scent of garlic Fritz had scrubbed too vigorously from the kitchen tile. Wolfe had eaten a second helping of corned beef hash at breakfast, always a sign he was mentally occupied. He hadn't yet commented on the morning's Gazette, which featured a tastefully cautious column, titled Vanishing Act, or Trapdoor Justice. Prominent psychiatrist disappearance exposes financial power broker. They got most of it right, which in our line of work is a miracle or a misprint. I was about to head down to the plant rooms when Wolfe said, "Arch." I paused in the doorway. "Yes, sir. There's one more element." "Of course there is. Miss Locke, Caroline, or Vivian." "Vivian," Wolfe said, and his tone flattened. "The instigator, the courier of the teacup, the person who first framed the mystery. She came to us," I said. "She was honest, at least enough to get the ball rolling." "Was she?" Wolfe folded his hands across his midsection. "She arrived with the lipstick cup, claiming concern. But consider, Caroline left that cup for her, not for the police, not for you, for her sister." I frowned. "You think Vivian was involved?" "I think Caroline did not trust her. Otherwise she would have spoken to her plainly. Instead, she created a riddle. That set me off." I went to my desk, pulled out the notebook Vivian had given Wolfe, Caroline's printouts, the photos of Russell and Daria in the apartment, and flipped back through the contents. Tucked between the pages, unnoticed until now, was a card, cream-colored, embossed, "The Locke Foundation, preserving mental health through private grants and professional integrity." I raised an eyebrow. "You ever heard of this?" "No," Wolfe said. "Well, they have a letterhead." He extended a hand. I gave him the card. He studied it for a moment, then said, "Investigate." Quietly. It was midday before I tracked down an address, a private suite inside a boutique law firm in Soho. I called, asked for information, and was told they weren't open to the public. I said I was doing a piece on independent mental health initiatives. They put me on hold for 6 minutes, then hung up. Subtle. So I dropped by. The Locke Foundation. It turned out was one room with 2 desks, 1 assistant, and a glass door that read, "Appointments by referral only." The assistant looked young enough to still believe in job security. I smiled and gave her my name. She hesitated, then let me in. Vivian Locke was seated behind a desk of pale wood and impeccable geometry. She was on the phone, but when she saw me, she hung up mid-sentence. "Mr. Goodwin," she said, standing, "to what do I owe the unexpected intrusion?" "Just tying up loose ends." "Regarding Caroline," I said. "And you." Her expression didn't flicker. "I assumed we were past all that." "So did I. Until Wolfe reminded me that your sister left that teacup for you, not us. She built her misdirection around the assumption that you'd show it to someone with enough brains to see it was planted. But she didn't tell you what it meant." "Why not?" Vivian moved to the window. Her back was to me now. "She didn't tell me everything," she admitted. "She couldn't. We'd fought. About what? Money, clients. The foundation. I wanted to expand it, bring in outside investors. She said it would dilute the mission." "You mean the mission to preserve confidentiality in a world that monetizes everything?" She turned. "Yes, she believed in discretion. I believe in impact. And you believed Russell could help you with that." There it was. She sat again, slower this time. "I had coffee with him. Once. He offered to triple our grant capacity if I brought him names. I said no, but Caroline didn't know that. She found out I'd spoken to him, and she shut down. She thought I'd betrayed her." "Had you?" "No," Vivian said. "Not yet." There was a silence, the kind Wolfe thrives on. I waited. "I brought her the teacup," Vivian said finally, "because I wanted to prove I hadn't been part of it, that I was on her side. I knew what it looked like. I knew how it would seem if I didn't act. And Caroline let you play the part." I said, "She left the cup for me because she wanted to see if I would help expose them or protect myself." I nodded. "And you?" "I brought it to Wolfe." I stood. "You passed the test, barely." She didn't reply. She didn't need to. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe listened without interruption. When I finished, he poured himself a third of a glass of beer and stared at the phone. "She is clever," he said. "Not trustworthy, but clever." "Caroline?" "Both," he said. "The sister set the wheels in motion, but the true precision was Caroline's. She anticipated betrayal, And then she arranged her absence like a chess move, only appearing again after the trap closed. You think she'll contact us? I think, Wolfe said. She already has. He gestured to the mail. I opened the envelope addressed to Wolfe. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice. Mr. Wolfe, I am safe. I am grateful. And I am resuming my practice in due time. The Locke Foundation will undergo restructuring. I believe you understand why. Please extend my thanks to Mr. Goodwin. He was sharp enough to see what others didn't. As for Vivian, some things must be rebuilt slowly. Yours, CL. I handed it over. Wolfe read it, then set it aside. Dinner, Fritz, he bellowed. I blinked. That's it. Of course. She fakes her own disappearance, triggers a confession, exposes a corporate blackmailer. And you treat it like someone misplaced a screwdriver. Wolfe lifted his beer. There are two kinds of mysteries, Archie, he said. Those built on chaos, and those built on design. Caroline Locke gave us the latter. My gratitude requires no fireworks. Neither does hers, apparently. Wolfe nodded. We dined on braised duck with apricot glaze and roasted fennel. Later that evening, as I sat in my room flipping through that day's notes, I found myself thinking about the chipped teacup again, not as a clue but as a question. A flawed object, deliberately left in plain sight, trusted to be noticed. And now it was back in Wolfe's office, polished, placed beside a pristine match, neither one used for drinking. Just 2 cups, one clean, one honest. And that was enough. The next morning arrived not with a phone call or a scream at the door, but with the hum of Fritz's vacuum cleaner, as it passed too close to Wolfe's orchid room. In most places that wouldn't count as a disturbance. In ours it was practically arson. Wolfe issued a bellow from upstairs, which I ignored on the grounds that he'd been warned twice to let Fritz finish his spring cleaning in peace. I was in the office, reviewing the last 2 weeks of notes, files and scribbles that might not seem important now but might someday prove that I hadn't just run around town chasing teacups and forged prescriptions like an idiot. I was mid-sentence in my write-up when the phone rang. I picked it up. Nero Wolfe's office. Archie Goodwin speaking. The voice on the other end was low, calm, and female. Familiar. Mr. Goodwin, Caroline Locke said. I thought you might appreciate a proper farewell. I stood. Wolfe looked up from his copy of La Cucina Napoletana. He could read expressions faster than I could deliver words. Dr. Locke, I said, keeping my voice neutral. You're safe, I hope. I'm safe, she said, and I've decided to leave the city. That gave me pause. Permanently. For now. There's a clinic in Vermont that offered me a sabbatical private practice in a mountain town. No reporters, no rustle, no foundation gala dinners. Sounds quiet. I could use quiet, she said. But I wanted to thank you. You and Mr. Wolfe. Wolfe made a faint noise like a sigh heard through a telescope. You didn't just help expose a man like Russell, she continued. You helped me find out who I could trust. My sister, for instance. She passed my test. But only just. She's not the kind to break the rules, I said. But she'll lean on them when the stakes get high. I know. I just wanted to see which way she'd lean when the ground shifted. You built a lot into that little teacup, I said. She chuckled. I had to make the truth visible without speaking it. There's something satisfying in that. Wolfe would agree. I assumed so. There was a pause, long, but not awkward. Just 2 people acknowledging that the case was closed, but the consequences were still filing out in slow lines like theatergoers after the final act. Will you keep in touch? I asked. No, she said, but I'll read the paper. Goodbye, Mr. Goodwin. She hung up before I could answer. I looked at Wolfe. She's going, I said. Mountains, fresh air, quiet minds. She deserves peace, Wolfe said. Though I suspect she'll find boredom first. He folded his paper and reached for the teacup, the one that had anchored the entire performance. He ran a finger along the rim, the tiny chip still visible, the mauve smear now long since removed by Fritz's surgical cleaning. "I detest theatricality," Wolfe muttered, "but I admire symmetry." "It worked," I said. "She laid out the clues. You read them." Russell stepped in it. "Yes. But it was not a mystery," Wolfe said. "It was a demonstration." "You think she was proving a point?" "I think," he said, "she understood the limits of the law. Russell couldn't be arrested for asking questions, for pressing someone, for wanting to erase her reputation. The law wouldn't catch him, so she turned to a different system." "Yours?" Wolfe nodded. "Justice is not always legal, but it must always be correct." I leaned back in my chair. "You sure she's not coming back?" "She may, but only after she's certain her story has faded." "Which it won't," I said. "Russell's going to trial. Daria is already talking. There's going to be hearings, articles, one of those 6-part podcasts with ominous background music." Wolfe grimaced. "You exaggerate." "No," I said. "I listened to the news." We sat in silence. Outside, I could hear the faint sound of Fritz yelling at a delivery man in the hallway. A fresh shipment of capers had arrived, and not the brand Wolfe liked. I stood. "You want me to file everything?" "Yes," he said. "And put the cup back. You're keeping it?" "Of course." "Why?" He looked up at me with that half-disdainful, half-patient stare he reserved for moments of pure pedagogical importance. "Because, Archie, it is an emblem. It represents deliberate imperfection in a perfect system." Caroline Locke's disappearance was designed to expose a truth. The teacup, damaged, smudged, out of place, was her statement. About Russell. About all of them. The foundation. Vivian, her patience. Even us. I whistled. "She really was playing chess." "She was playing Go," Wolfe corrected. "She surrounded the board and waited for the pressure to collapse her opponent's position." He closed the file folder and reached for his beer. "There is elegance in anticipation," he said, "but only if one is patient enough to allow it to unfold. That's why you waited. Why you didn't act too early." "Exactly," Wolfe said. "One does not interrupt a well-laid trap with unnecessary enthusiasm." I nodded, filed the last of the folders, and placed the chipped cup back on its place, near the corner of the credenza. Dinner. That night was trout with rosemary, and a cucumber salad chilled to within a degree of its life. Fritz, perhaps in honor of our recently completed case, had placed a folded white napkin beneath each dish with uncharacteristic flourish. Afterward, Wolfe leaned back with his second beer and said, "Do you suppose Caroline Locke will ever tell the full story?" "Not likely," I said. "She doesn't need to." "No," Wolfe agreed. "She only needed it to be known." He closed his eyes. That was his final word on the matter. And me. I went to bed that night, thinking not of what had been solved but what had been left behind. Not just a cup, not just a smear of lipstick, but a statement. I was here. I was precise. I was watching. And as far as mysteries go, that's about as close to truth as anyone gets. Wolfe spent the next few days in a silence, so serene, it bordered on suspicious. He took no new cases, refused 3 inquiries, one involving an heiress with a missing Amen, one a gallery owner with a stolen canvas, and the last a man who claimed his accountant was gaslighting him via spreadsheets, and instead busied himself in the plant rooms with his orchids. He even allowed me to leave early one evening, which meant either he'd gone soft or he was thinking about something too large to admit aloud. I suspected the latter. For my part, I kept tabs. Saul reported that Russell's bail had been denied. He was being held on fraud, conspiracy, and unlawful prescription charges, with more to come once Daria Webb's testimony fully unfurled. She'd flipped faster than a diner pancake and, from what we could tell, was painting a picture of Russell that involved blackmail, corporate sabotage, and a string of intimidation attempts woven through what he called strategic personal relationships. Caroline Locke's name had stayed conspicuously out of the public proceedings, just as Wolfe had ensured. When I asked Fritz if we'd heard from her, he said only, "No, and we won't." She left nothing in the refrigerator, which, for Caroline, was final. It was Friday evening when the last act played out. Quietly, like everything else in this case, I was reading a mystery novel that involved a poisoned chess set and a detective with a walnut allergy when Wolfe spoke from behind his desk. "Archie." I looked up. "Yes, sir. There is something left to do." I blinked. "I thought everything was tied up." He shook his head. "Tied? Yes, but not concluded." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a slim envelope, addressed to Vivian Locke, in Wolfe's unmistakable fountain pen scrawl. "I want this delivered by hand. To her office." "To her apartment," Wolfe said. "Tonight." I nodded. "What's in it?" "A summation," he said, "and a warning." That had my interest. I took the envelope, pocketed it, and headed out into the cooling June night. Vivian lived just off Park Avenue in a building with a doorman so discreet he looked like he might disappear if you stared too long. He recognized me instantly. Locke had briefed him, apparently, and sent me up without comment. She answered the door in loungewear that cost more than my monthly salary, and held a half glass of red wine. Her eyes scanned my face for signals before they landed on the envelope. "Mr. Goodwin," she said. "Delivering orchids now?" "No," I said. "Delivering this." She took it, looked at the name, and stepped aside. "I suppose I should read it in front of you." "You don't have to." She broke the seal and slid out the single page. Her eyes scanned the words. I watched carefully, not just her face but her shoulders, her stance, the little twitch in the corner of her mouth that told me when someone was bluffing. She finished reading and folded the letter, tucked it back in the envelope, set it on a console table. "Well," she said, "that good. It's what I deserved." Which is a reminder that playing close to the line doesn't mean I haven't crossed it. Wolfe didn't accuse, but he didn't absolve me either. She walked over to the window, looked out at the lights of Manhattan blinking like distant warnings. "I didn't betray Caroline," she said. "I believe you, but I thought about it," she admitted. "I thought about what I could gain, and she knew that. She knew me well enough to leave the cup and not say a word. That's what Wolfe wanted to make sure you understood." She turned to me. "Tell him I do." I nodded. "Will you stay with the foundation?" "Maybe. Maybe not. I think I've done enough building for a while." She offered me a smile, gentle, tired, real. "You and Wolfe," she said. "You're not what I expected. We usually aren't." I left her apartment with the city quiet beneath me, and Wolfe's words in my head. A warning, not a judgment. A close to a case that had never been about murder, but about something just as sharp: trust, broken and rebuilt in pieces. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe accepted my return with a nod and a grunt. Fritz was already plating dinner. Veal scallopini. Capers reappeared, his preferred brand, I noticed. "Letter received." She read it. "Took it well." "Good." "Took it well."